first off, there are varying degrees of trauma. Trauma, the most significant trauma ever to one person can be absolutely debilitating. And unless they get true professional help to process that trauma, which could take their whole life if it was a really significant, severe trauma, that could just wipe out somebody. Whereas that same significant trauma in somebody else may not present as a really challenging event to them. It could be bad, it could be something they endured, but their coping skills were different. The baseline by which they see the world is different. Their support network is different. The capabilities that they came in with from a psychological perspective and their foundation were different. So from a trauma perspective, I do see more and more people, as you suggested, that see trauma as a lifelong scar, that use trauma in telling their story, which is fine, as long as you keep moving to go past the trauma. The trauma is not going to be something you just forget, but it's something that doesn't have to contain the same emotional value from a negative perspective throughout your life that you started with. Our scars don't have to dictate our future. And so when we look at trauma being advertised, I like the idea that people are more willing to communicate and talk about their trauma, because it's a way of expelling it. It's a way of moving it through you and processing it. However, if you get stuck in your trauma and you define yourself by your trauma and you identify as your trauma, the individual you are, not the person who suffered from this trauma, but you have become the trauma, that's a real problem. And that's why, my background, one of the things I do is I was trained as a humanistic psychiatrist. And I say humanistic because no, it's not about just prescribing pills. There is a philosophical end to what I do and an existential end to what I do. And part of that is I am not, I tell clients when I used to own a treatment center and in mental health and personal growth. And I would tell people, no, you are not an anxiety patient. You are not bipolar. You are not depressed. You are not OCD. You are not ADHD. You are an individual. You are Bob. You have an entire aura, an entire energy, an entire person that you are, who happens to be suffering from these symptoms. The constellation of these symptoms make up this diagnosis of ADHD. And there are many elements to how you move past this ADHD. So it's very important when you look at identification. And now to get to the first thing that we were talking about, which is this sense of victim mindset. And I'm not saying don't be a victim. Don't portray the anger, the protest, the sorrow, the worry. I'm not denouncing being a victim by any sense of the imagination. What I am saying is that victim is the first step in a cycle. You move from victim to vulnerability. And I don't want people to get stuck in a sense of victim mentality by which they then identify as a victim throughout their life, to the point where they start to see the world through the lens of someone who is a victim, because then the world becomes a much more narrow, limiting, negative place, whereby look, if you look at some of the studies out there in the research studies on victim mentality, it's one of the primary reasons why people have a poor sense of well-being. The research is pretty clear on it, that when you're stuck in a victimization stance or mindset, you're not promoting well-being. You can't forgive. You have a hard time with forgiveness. You personalize everything. You ruminate. You have intrusive information. You become unhappy, and those around you don't like to be around you because of it. Yeah, and the last thing I'll say on this is that there's many reasons that you can be and stay stuck in a victim mentality. I mean, first off, when you are a victim, there's some people are victims. Let me just say, I want to think the best of people. So when someone is in a victim stance, and by the way, to negativity is part of being human. To endure pain is part of being human. You, me, name a person out there. We have all suffered. We all have the potential to be victims. I'm sure you've got a story where you were a victim. I've got lots of stories being a brown-skinned Muslim guy in the US when that's not really the popular way to be. I've been, discriminated against all the time, bullied, all sorts of stuff. Southwest Airlines has, my last name is Kareem. Kareem is like Bob in the world. And Southwest Airlines has my name on a watch list, the last name, which is like putting the name Joe or Bob on a watch list. So I have to go like an hour early just to go to the airport, an hour earlier than everybody else, because I don't know what's going to happen randomly when there's selection processes. Everyone's got some kind of a story. Now, some are really terrible tragedies of bullying and other things, and some maybe are not so much. But when you're in that victim stance, some people get lost in it, and it becomes a form of escapism from doing and activating other aspects of who they are. Some people go and stay in victim status because of community building, because you do enter a community of other people that feel the same way. And that's a good thing. That is not a bad thing. For some people, the victim status creates an expressive outlet for them. And it's a way to say, hey, this thing happened to me, and that's fine. However, you can't stay stuck in that. That is the biggest thing that I want to get out there.